I want to take a minute to tell you a little bit about us, the Stewardship Network. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization with a 20-year award-winning history. We serve 20 geographically place-based member communities that do on-the-ground collaborative stewardship and learning and engagement. I was just at a 25-year-old discussion section that's been meeting once a month here in my member community. And for those of you new to the Stewardship Network's monthly webcast, welcome. I would like to let you know that these happen on the second Wednesday of each and every month during the Eastern Time Zone's noon hour, Pacific Coast 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. Put it in your calendar as a recurring event and see if you're interested in the topic. Tune into our website. Our mission is to connect, equip, and mobilize people and organizations to care for land and water in their communities. And so we have been loving doing that and really inspired by the work that you all do in your communities. We are right now in the middle of our spring challenge. So again, for those of you who are new to the spring challenge, I'm going to give you a quick little overview. We've been doing this for 15 years. It started out focused around invasive species. This year is our most inclusive year of the spring challenge. So very exciting to see all of the entries coming in. So we have 3 different elements, 3 different ways to participate. You can be part of the competing part of the program, where we have, you all may remember, if somebody can find the image, somebody drop the image into the chat. But we have a cup, and we're going to award that to our member communities, also to just partner organizations that log the most hours, and then those of us individuals who might be out working on our own property, not affiliated with an organization. Then the support aspect of the program allows people to make financial contributions to fuel the program, and volunteers looking for events. You can go online to our event calendar and find events in your community. And the celebrate pillar. I can't wait to, I'm a quilter, and I have a quilt piece, the quilt top that I'm working on, that's all inspired by oaks, and I'm gonna submit that one. So we're getting music, we're getting all kinds of different art. And so just how does connecting to nature inspire you in some of the artwork that you do? So that's the celebrate pillar. As you all may know, the last couple of years with the pandemic has been a little weird, so it gave us a chance to revamp. And so we are able to see in this compete part of the program which member community or partner does the most for their community. Not the competitive type, not in this to win the cup, just submit your hours. We're all part of the same team. We're all part of one big team, all of us working together to celebrate the work that we do. And again, as I said, it's the most inclusive spring challenge that we've had this year, so that you can report your pulling of garlic mustard or other invasive plants. That's our heritage. Spraying, prescribed fire, burning, monitoring, whether that's monitoring, photo monitoring, or monitoring creeks and rivers for macroinvertebrates, planting, whether you're planting a prairie or a tomato plant in your yard, just let us know. And then cleanups, whether you're cleaning up an urban lot or a beach, whatever that is. We want to celebrate the work that you are doing out in your community. Again, with the support, volunteer with a group that's out in your community doing this work. You can go to our online events calendar and find information there. Make a financial contribution. Your contribution, no matter how big or small. I actually helped out a person in Detroit a couple weeks ago, and she just sent us a $10 donation. So your donation, $10, $100, $10,000 makes a difference to the work that we do. So thank you so much for those tax-deductible contributions. And again, as I said, the create aspect of the program, we're getting photos, poems, paintings, songs, and other creative work that we can use to inspire folks. Hashtag TSN Spring, tag us on socials. You'll find us there. So you can go to the website. You'll find all kinds of different program details. You'll find a PowerPoint if you want to send it to your board and tell them why you're participating, or if you want to share it with your neighborhood group, there's information there. And then you can also record all of your hours there. So we're excited about that. We're 1 month into it, and we have had all member communities, partner organizations, individuals are all on the books. Hours are reported against every single one of those areas that I mentioned to you. And we have still 2 more months of the challenge. The challenge goes into early July, and we've logged 1,000 hours. You all have logged 1,000 hours of celebrating this work. So thank you so much for the work that you do and for participating in the Spring Challenge. And with that, I want to turn us over to the subject at hand for the month. David Mifsud talking about the Michigan Herp Atlas and working all of David's work to protect and manage amphibians and reptiles. You would be hard pressed to find somebody who can share with you as much as he can about the work to manage amphibians and reptiles and the creative ways to think about integrating it into the stewardship work that you do. So with that, welcome to you all. Let me know if you have questions, drop them in the chat and or use the Q&A. Doesn't matter, I'm good with either. Make sure that you are sending them to everyone. So in the little toolbox of the chat, you'll notice that you can send to host and panelists, but go ahead and send it to everyone so that we can all see your questions and comments. So David, with that, I'll let you grab the screen share.
All right.
Take it away from there.
This would stop screen share. Can you see my presentation?
Not quite yet.
Let's see if this works.
There we go. I think you're about to do it.
Is it showing on your end?
Yep, you got it. Take it away.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you, Lisa. Thank you for having us. Thank you for all the work that you and the Stewardship Network do for all natural resources, but I will speak on behalf of the Amphibians and Reptiles. I am not the Lorax, but I will still speak for the Herps. Only a few of them can vocalize. So what I'm going to do today is share with you a little bit about the Michigan Herp HAT, a project that we have been working on for the last few years in collaboration and coordination with several project partners. Herp HAT stands for the Michigan Herpetological Habitat Assessment Tool. We have several partners, including EGLE, the Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, HRM, my company, Stewardship Network, Michigan Herp Atlas, and we also are working with the Michigan Amphibian and Reptile Technical Advisory Team on this project. So anyone who knows me knows that I like to give context to why amphibians and reptiles are important. Amphibians and reptiles are sensitive to human disturbances and environmental change. This makes them ideal candidates for assessing ecosystem health and function, and specifically for the purpose of this project and this discussion, wetland functionality. The project for Herp HAT was born out of a meeting I went to several years ago and a program that was developed by Ohio EPA called the Amphibian Index of Biological Integrity, or lovingly known as Amphibi, which was created in 2000. This program is similar to what we've created for Michigan. However, the difference is the program focused primarily on amphibians associated with vernal pools. And where this, the context of this comes into play is as it relates to some of the ranking that we have. In one ecosystem, a species might be problematic. In its native environment, it might be hugely beneficial and a keystone species. So having that context of locality is important on the broader picture of the ecosystem function. So a little more context. Overall, amphibians and reptiles on a global scale, particularly with our turtle species, are the most imperiled group of vertebrates globally. Turtles are actually even greater than that of our great apes. So the impacts to these organisms is significant, and our responsibility to help them is great. So a little bit about what the Herp HAT is. It was developed as a habitat assessment tool for Michigan amphibians and reptiles. Collectively, regionally, amphibians and reptiles are referred to as Herpetofauna, so I'll use that term here today. This bioassessment tool ranks and prioritizes habitats using Herpetofauna as a metric, much like that of IBI, or Index of Biological Integrity. This program requires 3 site visits in a rapid assessment framework. The advantage of that is you're getting out, seeing the landscape, but in a quicker approach than a more comprehensive survey. It also utilizes a suite of different data sets, including MiRAM data, the known species range, and various spatial data sets for Herpetofauna, including the State of Michigan's Natural Heritage Database, as well as the Herp Atlas database.
David,
lastly,
can you remind us what MiRAM is again?
It's the Michigan Rapid Assessment for Wetlands. It was developed to quantify and rank wetland communities within the state of Michigan to evaluate the the ecosystem function as well as the overall conditions.
Thanks.
And then PARCA, so yeah, thank you. And then PARCA is the priority amphibian and reptile conservation areas. The organization PARC, Partners in Amphibian and Reptile Conservation, reached out to us to help develop priority conservation areas within the state. And we identified 5 regions within Michigan through an evaluation process that meets the criteria that are the key core conservation areas for amphibians and reptiles here in Michigan. HerpHAT HAT itself was field tested in 2021. It's going to be field tested in 2022 as well. And the results were compared to MiRAM data sets and scored in comparison. We feel that the HerpHAT HAT overall is an important conservation and management tool, not just for looking at amphibians and reptiles, but looking at ecosystems as a whole. I'm going to try moving this. Here we go. Oops, let me go back. The HerpHAT HAT was developed as a biotic metric, as I mentioned, to evaluate the functional value of a wetland with emphasis on amphibians and reptiles. It can be utilized by a variety of different practitioners, which is exciting for me, including regulators, land managers, natural resource professionals, both public and private, as well as land stewards. Individual citizens, if they want to evaluate their own landscapes, can utilize this resource. The tool itself is designed to quantify the function of an individual wetland. It also will qualitatively rank a habitat. Now, this is important. It is not designed to compare different wetland types. And what I mean by this is you can have 2 sites that have a relatively similar score or even the same score, but each of those communities fulfills a very different ecological function. For example, you might have a marsh complex and a vernal pool receiving the same score. However, those 2 communities function very differently. It is not intended to measure the amount of disturbance on a landscape has experienced either. This is really relevant and important because Herpetofauna, and where this project really was born from, going on probably 20 years ago for me now, is so often sites are disregarded because they're not pristine landscapes. They are fallow fields. They are wetlands that might have things like reed canary present. Herpetofauna care more about the function and the structure of a landscape more so than the floristic quality of a location. If it has vertical vegetation that meets a similar functional value of a high priority rare sedge, it will still thrive in that landscape. And so unfortunately, many wetlands have been lost, many landscapes have been modified with the idea that it may not be supporting high ecosystem function, when in reality, from an amphibian or reptile standpoint, these degraded landscapes can exceed the biodiversity of more pristine adjacent landscapes because of some of those variables that are present on that site. So one thing that we did is we tried to do engagement as part of this project. We looked at 8 different metrics when we evaluated the habitat assessment tool. We reached out to project partners and collaborators to get their feedback on the different metrics that we use. So we have 8 metrics that I'm going to go through where we worked with resource professionals, including the Amphibian and Reptile Technical Advisory Committee, to rank each species against the metrics with a score of 1 through 10 based off of individual expertise. The pooled values for these were reviewed and calculated, resulting in a coefficient of conservatism, or a C value, for the final score. And we'll go through those right now. So for rarity, it's rare species with isolated populations will receive a higher score. So a good example of that is an eastern Massasauga rattlesnake. Fragmentation sensitivity, Blanding's turtles require large complex mosaics of habitats. And when we fragment these systems, it has the deleterious effects on species like this. So species that require extensive habitat mosaics to fulfill their life history receive higher scores than those that are not. Generalist versus specialist, fairly straightforward. Four-toed salamanders require specific habitats on the landscape, particularly for their reproductive cycle. And as such, species with more specific life history traits and requirements will receive a higher score than those that are more generalist species, such as green frogs or painted turtles. Fecundity, the reproductive potential and output. For example, a mud puppy have relatively low fecundity. They're also relatively long-lived species. So they only lay anywhere from 18 to about 140 eggs per breeding season. So that's relatively small compared to other amphibians, such as green frog that may produce as many as 20,000 eggs per year. Life expectancy, we also evaluated how long organisms live. So in this case, a wood turtle can live at least 70 years. Blanding's turtles are known to live over 80 years. We don't actually know the true longevity. This is one of those sad situations that those who are studying them die before the animals themselves. So we are still learning so much about what the true longevity of these organisms are. Probability of detection was also considered. More cryptic species receive a higher score for this category. And then hydroperiod requirements. So we also looked at species that require seasonal availability of water. So these are your fishless habitats. That's where the duration of the water is going to be significant to the presence of that organism. And then specifically looking at fishless aquatic habitats such as vernal pools and those species that require a fishless habitat for the reproductive output. A good example of this would be wood frogs or spotted salamanders. They can actually sense whether there are fish in the water. They can pick up chemical cues on the landscape. Great tree frogs also. I get great tree frogs in my pond every year, and as soon as they step their big toe in there, they can sense that I have some top minnows in there. Like, I'm out, I'm not doing this, because they know that the fish will consume their eggs. Yes, I anthropomorphized a little bit there. So how do we calculate the raw C score? We estimated a score from 0 to 10 for each metric that I described. The average of all the metrics across each species was calculated. And then the average of the C scores for each species was submitted by each professional. We made sure we didn't give them too much information, and we did not want people talking to each other. We wanted the raw response from seasoned experts on what they felt the scores should be, and then we compiled those. So we calculated, and then we normalized each of these scores so that they would average on a 0 through 10 scale. So in this case, we have 10, then we have our raw C score, we divided by 8, divided by 1, normalized our C score, and so on. This is the math part that's important, but not as exciting as what the end results are. So the final C scores, we then calculated for each of our species in Michigan. So this is all of our frog species. So we have, again, you have something like Blanchard's cricket frog, Acer blanchardii. It receives an 8.5 as its final C score, or coefficient of conservatism. Whereas green frogs, a species that is more abundant, a species that is less sensitive, receives a lower score in comparison. Spring peepers, while they require some unique habitat features, are relatively abundant and thus utilize ubiquitous habitats. They received a slightly lower score. Things like boreal chorus frogs, which have a small range, mink frogs, which are habitat specialists in the UP, received higher scores. Similarly, you'll see most of our salamander species received relatively high scores, including marble salamanders, which are our only fall breeding species, received the highest score of 10. The redback salamander, which is not a true aquatic species, but aquatic adjacent. So we looked at all organisms found in Michigan, all amphibians and reptiles. They are most abundant. They can occur in a variety of forested landscapes. They received a score of 2.5. It's not saying that one is not important. It's showing the relative rarity and sensitivity, similar to a FQI, or floristic quality assessment. When we look at our turtle species, things like snapping turtles are a generalist species. Midland painted turtles are a generalist species, whereas spotted turtles very much a habitat specialist, cryptic, rare, relatively low fecundity, and relatively long-lived. They received a score of 10. For our lizard species, yes, not aquatic species, but aquatic adjacent. And why wouldn't we rank everything? Why would we omit 2 species, right? We want inclusion even in our herp world. So we looked at both of our reptile or lizard species, and they received a score of 5.5 each. So we then get final to our snake species, where you'll see species like queen snakes, riverine, Massasaugas, fen, and wet meadow dominated species. They utilize a relatively unique habitats. They received higher scores. So then ultimately we take all this information that we now have our coefficient of conservatism, or our C scores, and then we have to determine the species composition of a wetland. We then record the number of species that are observed in each of these habitats. We multiply the number of individuals by our C score for each of those species. And then voila, we have the sum of the species subtotal. So there we have the sum of the subtotal is 50. And then our HerpHAT score, we take that 177.5 divided by the 50, and the overall functional score for that site is a 3.55. So relatively low in comparison to some of our other areas that might have a much higher score. So what does this mean, and how does it ultimately get used? So how to calculate the final wetland score? One of the things we wanted to make sure that we were doing is not just looking at this in isolation, but how does it relate to our MiRAM scores? And is it best to take a combined score? And we'll talk about that in a moment. So we take our HerpHAT score, we multiply it by a MiRAM score for the location, and that gives you your overall wetland score. In this case, 230.75. We looked at various variables when doing our data analysis, regression to determine the linear relationships. We did t-tests to compare means of the wetland scores. And within that, some of the interesting things that that came about from our findings is that there was a significant positive linear relationship between wetland score and MiRAM score, and between wetland score and HerpHAT score. Inversely, though, we did see that there was a negative related correlation between MiRAM and HerpHAT. Where this is significant and important is this could indicate that HerpHAT scores need to be supplemented by MiRAM scores, because they alone do not represent the fullness of a wetland, represent the usefulness of wetlands to herps. So looking at MiRAM alone, it tells you the functional value of the wetland, but it isn't considering wholly what it means for amphibian and reptile presence. So incorporating a HerpHAT score with MiRAM, or for that example, for also using a FQI score, makes the overall results more robust and gives you a better picture of the overall landscape. A site might have relatively low floristic quality. It might have a relatively low MiRAM score as a result, but the Herpetofauna and the HerpHAT score might buffer that sufficiently to show that this wetland has ecological functional value that is significant enough that we should be protecting it. And as I mentioned earlier, where this becomes significant is working in this field for over 20 years now, I've seen moderate quality sites that, we look at things with a pristine pre-settlement eye, and we don't live in a pre-settlement landscape. We are in an absolutely disturbed landscape. Even our most pristine sites have some human influence on them. When we consider that, we also should be looking at knowing that things are not pristine and they're not static. These are dynamic systems. Even the most pristine location 200 years ago, 300 years ago, if you were to go back to the same spot, it doesn't look the same. If you go back to a site yesterday versus today, great example, with the sun, with the heat that we have going on, you can get to a spot a few days apart, and it was leaf off a few days ago. By the end of this week, it's going to be completely leafed out. You had mentioned morels. You're going to have a short window of access to some of these things based off of weather. So the conditions today are not going to be the conditions tomorrow, whereas the species tell you the story overall. So some of the applications of the HerpHAT: it's a valuable resource for the regulators, as I mentioned, natural resource practitioners, private sector biologists, natural resource organizations, and environmental stewards. One of the things that we've discussed and worked with Eagle on with this project is trying to make sure that this is a resource available to consultants when evaluating habitats, particularly high-profile large projects, to consider what the impacts that project may have on amphibians and reptiles. Again, given their sensitivity to the landscapes, given the metrics that we looked at, we feel confident that the HerpHAT will help to better define the functional value of these landscapes versus the emotional value that some of these landscapes might have. People don't like reed canary grass, and I'm not a huge fan of it. It can be a monoculture of reed canary can be aesthetically unpleasing. Functionally, though, I've worked on sites that might have as many as 18 different species of amphibian or reptile utilizing it. So how do we say that that doesn't have an ecological significance? And maybe reframing it, how do we restore that landscape versus eliminating it to not only provide that function for amphibians and reptiles, but how do we restore the botanical diversity and other variables that we want to see there without the loss to our herp communities? It also allows users to determine the functional value of the wetland in an accurate, rapid manner. One of the things that we wanted to do is, I love herping. I love being out on the landscape. Not everyone has that same passion, and not everyone is going to have the same skill set and time to go out. So we wanted to create something that was a rapid assessment that can be done by resource practitioners with a moderate amount of training and understanding of our amphibians and reptiles. What I'm excited about too is this has a feedback mechanism. So one of the components of this is doing a desktop review in advance of doing the HerpHAT in the field. By compiling additional data, as practitioners are going out collecting data, that then feeds back into databases like the Herp Atlas. It feeds back into the Michigan Heritage database, and then that makes those databases more robust and powerful, ultimately making the HerpHAT a more powerful tool for management. So with that, the Michigan Herp Atlas is a critical component to this. We're working with Eagle right now to have the data from this database get integrated into their MyWater system and ultimately be used as a tool for MiRAM. MiRAM and HerpHAT. We went through a major overhaul last year. Technology mandated that we do some of this. Some technologies we were using on our previous website became antiquated and no longer functional. So we went through a significant revamping of the Herp Atlas website. One of the things that we had mixed feelings about from folks is the requirement of, or not a requirement, but in order to collect data in the field using an app, now you can use your phone, log in directly to the website, and it will even record your current location. There's as you can see, hopefully, the use my current location functionality, and it'll populate your latitude and longitude. The reason we created some of these features is some folks find apps to be invasive, and some of them feel that there's data mining. We don't do any data mining with this. We are now in phase 2 of the Herp Atlas upgrades and improvements. When we wrap up, I don't want to break the technology is what it is, and I'll wait till the end and I'll show you what we've done with some of the website work here. But we're really excited. We are in phase 2 of some of our improvements. Phase 3 is going to have more interactive analyses available, so that COVID really got me thinking about how functional and useful some of these resources we have are. I had some school teachers reach out to me very angry because they were upset that the website crashed. Like, we're relying on this to teach our lectures. Like, well, I didn't know that. I'm glad to hear that, but we'll make sure it gets back up and running. So from that, we thought, well, we can have some fun with this. So publicly available data is available at the county level. Beyond that, it requires partnership, data use agreements, and so on. But if a school group wanted to look at trends in American toad calling, they can use weather data, use the Herp Atlas, and we can start to develop queries that students can then utilize to do analysis and to answer questions about climate change. We can look at diversity and distribution of species over time within geographic areas. We can look at things on a watershed basis. What is our healthiest watersheds? So I think about organizations like the Huron River Watershed, probably the most healthy deemed urban watershed. It's a mixed, I have a hard time fully calling it an urban watershed, but a majority of it is an urban watershed. We can start to look at how healthy is our watersheds and how healthy are our sub watersheds, and what can we do to improve some of those things. And then a picture here that I have to share, and I don't know if Melanie Mannion is going to be here, but this young lady right here, which she has to be a young lady at this point because this was probably 7-8 years ago. Ariana is why I love doing what I do. This little girl and her dad, who's pictured next to her in the waiters, he took her out to all of our presentations. This is the future, and we want to create a product and products that allow young aspiring biologists like her to have resources and something exciting and fun to look at. So we also have it where you can view your records on Google Earth. And we actually had a pair of grandparents that take their grandkids out on nature hikes. And one of the things that they did is they go across all of Michigan, and then they would log the records in the Herp Atlas. And by doing so, they would go back and look at the different places as kind of a keepsake to spending time with their grandkids of all the different places that they've taken them to. So it's, for me, a fun way to not only compile data that is important, but also engaging our citizen scientists in something that is fun, exciting, and I think useful. So one other thing I wanted to mention is how it's important to have the data. It's important to have these resources, but how are you going to apply it? And one of the things we're working with the Stewardship Network and with Eagle on is a revision to our best management practices manual we wrote in 2014. I was incredibly excited and honored to know that within the first 48 hours, the document was downloaded. I think it was well over 1,000 times in 22 different states and 13 different countries. I had a colleague who passed away a few years ago who did quite a bit of work in Mexico. And I was shocked when he downloaded, he says, best management is best management. Doesn't matter where you are. If it's about creating structure and function for animals, a nesting beach is a nesting beach. Basking logs are basking logs. It doesn't matter if it's an Amazonian species. It doesn't matter if it's a species in Michigan. We should be thinking about these bigger picture. Vermont uses this document too, which I was really pleased with. So the BMP manual was created to address threats to amphibians and reptiles and provide recommendations to help protect and conserve them. We are working on updating this. We hope to have that out by the end of the year. Some of the new topics are include Eastern Massasauga rattlesnakes. We're dedicating a section on that, expanding on our vernal pool conservation. One things that I'm passionate about, and we talked about early on in the presentation, is turtle conservation. So a section on turtle head starting and nest protection. Every year I get people reaching out to me. How do I protect turtle nests? How do I help turtles that are crossing the road? What do we do in these situations? And there's only so many times I can get to these messages, so many times I can answer phone calls, and we want to create something that we can direct people to about how they can engage in being turtle stewards, how they can be direct ambassadors to help conserve these little creatures. Just this week, right on our property, and I apologize if you can hear it, I have a contractor out. Ironically, we're expanding our vernal pool on the property, and we're creating habitat. I absolutely believe in leading by example. So I have hibernacula. We create nesting beaches. We have several species of native turtles that utilize our property, and we've already rescued and relocated several baby painted turtles that are hatching out all over the property. And last year, I think we had somewhere around 50 painted turtle babies that showed up that the females nested on our site. So it can be done, and it can be done on relatively small properties. It can be done on very large properties. So we want to help to provide those resources. We also are going to focus more on connectivity and fragmentation abatement, things like railways. can be a massive killer for turtles. They get up onto the rails, they fall in between the rails. It's a deeper channel there. They can't climb out. They desiccate. They die. Sometimes they get hit. Unfortunately, I was doing wood turtle work with Jim Harding in the UP several years ago, and a snapping turtle lunged at a train while it was in between the tracks and was severely wounded. We had to unfortunately euthanize the animal, but we were able to recover 48 eggs from her, and 44 of those hatched out. We had started half of them, released half of them right away. It's not an ideal situation, but although she was biologically dead, her genetics live on longer. So we want to talk about how to minimize some of these types of fragmentations. And also something that keeps popping up is addressing some of the issues with soil erosion products. Well-meaning individuals and organizations still are using filamentous plastics as part of soil erosion, even on restoration projects. And these photodegradable products have a massively negative impact on reptiles, amphibians, and many of our bird species. We've had projects that shoreline restorations, and we'd have several birds stuck in those. So we want to focus on not just, I've never been big into here's what you're doing wrong, but here's solutions to make things right. If you just tell people what they're doing wrong, you lose an opportunity. If you show them solutions that are attainable and resources to acquire them, you've now created an advocate. So we're going to focus on that, and it'll be available in multiple locations. And as you started the presentation off, I made a little note to myself, the rock stacking. And as beautiful as rock stacking is, depending on the situation, particularly on river corridors or stream corridors, that can be really deleterious and damaging to that ecosystem. When you're on Lake Michigan Beach and you've got smooth rocks, very little impact is going to happen. But if you're in a system that mud puppies, or if you're further south where there's hellbenders or streams that have small stream breeding species, removing those rocks are functionally removing critical habitat features in the water column. And sometimes when the rocks fall back down, they can injure or harm animals. So many parts of the state, they actually discourage that. I'm sorry, part of the country, they discourage those sorts of things. And in of itself is not a bad thing. It's beautiful, it's artistic, it's wonderful, but it's context. A mutual colleague of ours had shared how when she was young with her kids, she would jump on punky logs. And once I shared with her that when you look underneath them, all the salamanders underneath them, she refused to jump on a log ever again. In fact, stepping over even big mature logs that are not even rotting away yet. It's just some of those little things that we don't necessarily think about that are opportunities for engagement and helping to reduce the harm to wildlife. So some of the next steps as we look at the HerpHAT, we are going to be working with Eagle to create, hopefully through like Survey 123, a user-friendly digital data collecting app so that they can actually run the analysis right on their phones using this resource with the data ultimately, hopefully porting to these different databases also, so that EQAs, environmental quality analysts, or anyone who's doing work utilizing the HerpHAT can real-time get a score and evaluate a landscape. We're going to continue doing some field testing both into spring and summer, and then 2023 we're going to hopefully have some field testing done by Eagle staff as well and other practitioners who are interested in working on that. We will be finalizing our report yet this year for the pilot work that we've created, and hopefully working with Stewardship Network and Eagle to develop some training workshops to get the HerpHAT implemented throughout the state. And I would love to see other states utilize this model and this tool and implement this in their own states. And then with that, I'm happy to take some questions, and depending on if there's still time, I do have the revised and upgraded new Herp Atlas website up and running. I'm excited to say that we now have on the online database, HRM took over in fall of 2010 the Herp Atlas. And when we took over, there was approximately 1,500 total observations in the database. With the online portion alone, we're at over 30,000. And with all of our partnership and collaboration, we have over 350,000 records in cumulative databases of what we work with.
David, that's amazing. Thank you, Mr. Herpman. Also, tell us what we're looking at right here.
So this is a mud puppy, and I actually, I forgot to do this. I'm going to zoom all the way, go all the way back to the front. So the very first slide, to me, this is the alpha and the omega. This is the beginning, the end. This photo captures everything that I think is important when we need to evaluate landscapes. What we have here, I'm on Beaver Island, one of my favorite places in the world to be. This is an American toad. On Beaver Island, American toads are ginormous. They're bigger than phones, okay? They have a giganticism thing that happens on, there's an island effect where the species gets much larger. Next to it is one of my favorite plants, pitcher's thistle. So we have one of our most abundant species and one of our rarest species on one of our rarest and most precious coastlines, our Great Lakes coastal communities. And the reason I have this photo, when I saw the opportunity to take this picture, I won't lie, I have about 50 pictures, and it took me about 10 minutes to get the one that I was happy with. This really is about, it's not just focusing on our rarest species, but the fundamental is keeping our common species common. That is truly the foundation of our ecosystems. If we are so fixated on trying to save the leaves of a tree at the expense of the roots, we lose everything. So the American toad here for me symbolizes that we have to be mindful that our common species are just as important as our rare species, because many of our rare species were common just a few years ago. You look at things like little brown bats. People disregarded little brown bats a decade ago. Now it's a significant species. We disregarded monarch butterflies 20 years ago. Now we're evaluating them for federal protection. So if we're not thinking about our common species today, they're going to be part of our rare species tomorrow.
David, that's a great point, right? Thank you for that.
Yep.
Couple other questions. One, Steve asked a little bit about how much weight does Eagle put on the MiRAM and HerpHAT scores? Like, how much weight do they put on those?
I know they utilize well, as of right now, HerpHAT is not finished. So the goal is to incorporate it into projects that are high priority locations and to incorporate it for monitoring. I know they rely on MiRAM scores for a subset of projects, and it's an important tool, but to the degree that it is, I would say that I would defer to Eagle to really answer that question of how they incorporate it, to the extent they incorporate it, because it's also moving targets, right? They as these programs evolve, they start to see a greater value of them. As now we're in the world of COVID, some of these things may have been less significant due to field data being collected. So I would say that I know MiRAM is an important resource and tool for Eagle, and I know working with Amy Lowndes and Anne, this is something they've felt strongly about for several years, having the HerpHAT be created and utilized.
That's great. And we've got a couple folks from Eagle on the line, so if you want to drop anything into the chat there, that'd be great. So then, David, switching gears, I do want to make sure that we have time for you to kind of jump on to the Herp Atlas site, because I think that'll be really valuable for folks. But Sue asks, I spend time with my grandboys in our woods, which has several vernal ponds. I've carefully lifted small chunks of rotted wood and discovered a salamander. Then I carefully replaced the wood. How disruptive is this?
I look at everything under the context of an acronym we created called RIDE. And this is part of the Herp Atlas philosophy. The experience teaching young people about amphibians and reptiles in that isolated situation where you're rolling a log and seeing these organisms, the damage coming from that is far less than the engagement of young people who might be your future stewards or might be your future biologists, or politicians who have a soft spot for a salamander that their grandma showed them when they were a kid. Where it becomes problematic is when, so typically the protocols we utilize is, and I'll describe what RIDE is in a moment. We first, once you roll the log and you see the animal underneath it, we never roll the log directly back because it could function as a rolling pin. And I've been to sites where people have been rolling logs looking for herps. They either don't roll them back or they roll them back and leave the animals underneath them. And we find lots of smashed and harmed animals. So we always move them just outside from underneath the log, place the log back, and they crawl right back underneath it. RIDE stands for RIDE. First, there's research. Are you using it for scientific purposes? Are you using it for identification, documentation? I'm sorry, not research, relocation. So are you moving a turtle off of the road? You pick up the animal. Are you trying to identify the animal? Sometimes you need to pick up an animal in hand to know what you're looking at. You have to look at diagnostics. Documentation, you might need to photograph an animal, and if it's going to run away, you need to have it in hand to document it. And then education. So in the example here, you have the E. So for me, the cost benefit is well worth it to have an opportunity to teach, engage. And the only thing that can make this even better is if she submitted the observation to the Herp Atlas.
That's great. I like it. RIDE, relocation, identification, documentation, and education. Did I get that right?
You got it.
All right, good. So then a couple other questions. You mentioned, Kelsey asked, you mentioned recovering eggs from a snapping turtle. How long are the eggs viable inside a female after she's passed?
It's a hard one. You can have as much as about 24 hours. So turtle physiology is quite amazing. An animal can be biologically dead, functionally dead, brain function stops, but the heart will still beat for hours after the animal is deceased. Where the opportunities you have, I've found animals that were almost maybe the next day I got to them, the eggs had actually, because the body cavity was open, it was allowed to get some oxygen. The eggs had already chalked, meaning that they turned from this pink to yellow color to white, where the embryo actually adheres on the interior. I've been able to rescue Blanding's turtle's eggs this way. You have a few hours, maybe a day at most, but if it's really hot, if it's right along a highway, you sometimes only have a few minutes to an hour to do something with it. One thing I will stress is if you want to do these sorts of things, I know Laura Tremor Spears reached out and she has a salvage permit for it. You know, if there's an isolated situation, you reach out to the agencies, hey, I found this, I collected the eggs. I'm an advocate for, it's better to ask forgiveness than wait 3 months to get your permit. I did this, I'm relocating it. Always be mindful of safety first and foremost. And Tom Gagne might be mad at me for saying that, but I would hate for eggs that could be salvaged. We created the situation to allow for that turtle to die. We created the road networks. We know now what we could be doing for minimizing fragmentation on roads, and we aren't integrating measures to minimize that. And that falls on all of us to push our agencies, push the limits, push the norms of what is acceptable for projects and rethink what is appropriate. And I've worked on some projects where we've come darn close to getting wildlife culverts put in on places, even sometimes habitat restoration. And one of the big challenges is engineers. We need to get more engineers understanding the ecological benefits of these, and we need more managers forcing these situations, more agency professionals to say, we're not asking, do you think we should put culverts? We're indicating these things need to be incorporated. I'm to this day very disappointed on a project on Belle Isle where due to the historical review, they said we couldn't put this short wall, beautiful cobblestone barrier wall in this particular area that is a known kill zone for migrating amphibians and reptiles. We couldn't integrate the culvert like we had wanted to. And the curbs are very high in this location. They're not rolled curbs, they're steep curbs. And every year we do monitoring there, we still find American toads, leopard frogs, turtles, every year smashed on the road. And that was an opportunity that we lost. And better engagement, better education. I think long term we'll see that change. It may not happen. It'll certainly be me fighting the fight to try getting it, but it'll probably be someone else who succeeds at it. I'll be long gone.
David, that's right. I was just talking with folks yesterday about the whole idea of just change takes a long time. And so keep it coming. As you say, our younger folks coming up, our engineers will know those things and understand how that fits into the larger ecosystem. And we can look forward to that if we keep marching this march. So David, let me ask you one more question. Feel free to drop other questions that you have in the chat, but let me ask you one more question, and then I want to give you time to go ahead and share the website. But Dan, who manages a Herp HAT and wants to support it someday, asks, what's the best way to follow the development and rollout of the HerpHAT?
So I will say through the Stewardship Network and the Eagle website. I'm hopeful once we get to the point of having this ready for public output and public distribution, we will have some sort of announcement and hopefully some level of celebration. I know I'll be celebrating to see it done. So yeah, hopefully we'll be certainly through social media, through our platforms, we'll have that information. I would assume as a partner in a lead group, Stewardship Network would also be promoting it.
We will as well. And Dan, if you ever have any questions, just send me an email or send David an email and we'll let you know, we'll give you the update.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. David, want to share your screen again? I want to make sure that we have time to share this great resource. Sure. And I really appreciate one of the things that you were sharing about your best management practices workbook is just the idea that you developed it for the state of Michigan, but it works all over. And so.
Exactly. So this is our main page now for the Herp Atlas. We have a wonderful sponsors page, the database itself, a little bit about us as an organization. We have a checklist of all the different species. We have diversity maps and activity maps. So if I click on activity map, it'll take me, oh, yeah, here we go.
Exactly.
I do have country internet here, so I do apologize, folks. You can see geographically where we have the highest occurrences or highest number of observations. So Oakland County, Washtenaw County, I'm trying to keep Jackson County on the map. We have some folks, Steve is incredible about Mecosta County getting observations. So in some of these cases, these are onesies and twosies. These are individual contributors who have been so passionate and dedicated. These other ones, they're not slacking. It's just we have some people who are kicking butt and taking names out here, compiling data. But if you wanted to add a record, one of the features that we did that we're really excited about is you submit that you have the basic information, but what right here is really important is the add another observation or add another species. So in some cases, you might be at the exact same location or at the same intersection. There might be 5 different species dead on the road, or there might be 5 turtles basking on the same log. You can record the same latitude and longitude for all of them at one single location and have multiple records. So you don't have to submit individual records for everything. We've reintegrated. This is one of the things that we lost when we had our previous system, enter a location. So you can now enter a location and it'll populate that. But you can also double click on a spot and it automatically populates your latitude and longitude. So we're really trying to create a resource that simplifies things. It also has a functionality that we can activate for researchers that allow them to, if they want to do mark recapture studies, it has species ID. So if you're studying box turtles, you can have an individual recorded, or if you're individual landowner, you want to track the movement of turtles on your property and number, Sam, Michael, Rob, Janice, and Samantha. But if that's what you want to use or assign a code, you can actually track their distribution and movement all over your 50 acres. So we have that ability integrated now so that we can also do mark recapture components to the database. As I mentioned, we have the checklist, but we also have important information about the important facts, but this is also where we have information about the, we're ultimately going to be creating some student resources. As part of our next phase, we have our brochure. We also have the ethics of atlasing, which I was talking about with, which is our RIDE program, which is, we talked about. So yeah, we're really happy with where this has come through so as I mentioned, as we've talked about a little bit, we've recently developed a new nonprofit called MARC, Michigan Amphibian and Reptile Conservation. And the goal is long-term, or in the next couple of years, I should say, not that long, is for the Michigan Herp Atlas to no longer be under the DNR and HRM as a collaboration, but to be fully managed, housed, and run by MARC. So then it would be completely housed by a nonprofit, and we have a board so that the board helps make the decisions on how the data gets utilized, how we go about looking for funding sources. Most of the Herp Atlas at this point is self-funded by HRM, by me. We do have some incredible sponsors who help out, including the DNR, but we absorb a bulk of the expenses, and I would like to see this also live past me. So the nonprofit, part of the goal of that is to be an institution in Michigan that allows for us to have that longevity that will certainly surpass my time on this plane, and hopefully will be something that will be around for generations to come, including being not only a steward of data, but a steward of Michigan's herp history. So a location where, if you're interested in publications about, who studied in 1978 at this particular state park, who did a publication on blue racers out there, we would have housed all of those publications in one central location.
David, it looks great, right? And it's so satisfying to have that updated piece and that updated form. And so myherpatlas.org, check it out.
Yes.
And David, thank you so much. Always a pleasure. As I said,
Thank
your
you.
knowledge, experience, and passion goes so deep. It's really a pleasure. We appreciate you spending the time, spending the hour with us. Thank you to you all online for participating in the webcast. Great to be with you. I want to, before you go, remind you about the spring challenge between now and July 5th. Report early and often. And it's for everyone, right? All kinds of categories for everybody. Hashtag TSN Spring. Thanks for spreading the word. You'll find all of the information on the website, stewardshipnetwork.org, Spring Challenge. And again, thank you. We'll be back next month on the second Wednesday of June 8th, and we'll look forward to being with you then. Again, thanks so much. Enjoy the coming spring and take care. Stay safe.